Two systems for mental well-being are separated by 2,000 years of history. One is an ancient philosophy practiced by Roman emperors. The other is a modern, evidence-based therapy used by millions today. Yet they share an identical core. This video explores the profound and deliberate parallels between Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy, known as CBT. You will gain a complete understanding of how ancient wisdom perfectly anticipated modern psychology, giving you a powerful framework to manage your own thoughts and emotions. This is not a coincidence, but a rediscovery. How could philosophers without microscopes or brain scans map the human mind so accurately? What did a Roman emperor's private diary have in common with a therapist's note? And you will see these two traditions not as distant relatives, but as two expressions of the same fundamental truth about how our minds work. What does it say about us that the same solution was found 2 millennia apart? That central insight is the master key that unlocks both systems. It is a simple idea with revolutionary consequences. Our emotional world is not a direct reaction to what happens to us. It is a reaction to what we tell ourselves about what happens. The event itself is neutral. The meaning we assign to it is everything. This is the cognitive model of emotion, and it is the bedrock upon which both ancient philosophy and modern therapy are built. 2,000 years ago, the Stoic teacher Epictetus put it with elegant clarity. He wrote, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." Pause on that for a moment. The disturbance, the anxiety, the anger, the sadness does not come from the external thing. It comes from the internal view. The judgment, the story, this was not a casual observation. It was the cornerstone of Stoic practice. A Roman senator facing public disgrace, or a merchant losing a ship at sea, would be trained to see their hardship not as a catastrophe in itself, but as a situation filtered through their own beliefs about honor, security, and fortune. Their peace of mind depended on examining those beliefs. Now, fast forward to the middle of the 20th century. Pioneering psychologists like Ellis and Beck, working independently, arrived at the exact same map of the mind. They observed that their patients were not suffering because of events alone, but because of the automatic, often distorted, thoughts those events triggered. Beck called these automatic negative thoughts. Ellis called them irrational beliefs. Their revolutionary model, which became cognitive behavioral therapy, can be summarized in a simple sequence. It is not the event, A, that causes the emotional consequence, C. It is the belief, B, the thought in between, that is the true cause. Event, then belief, then consequence. This is a direct, uncanny echo of Epictetus across the centuries. The Stoic view is the CBT belief. The disturbance is the emotional consequence. The structure is identical. When you receive criticism at work, the event is the same. The emotional result, however, depends entirely on the belief. If your automatic thought is, "This proves I am a failure," the consequence will be shame and despair. If your belief is, "This is specific feedback I can use to improve," the consequence might be mild concern or even motivation. The event did not change. The story you told yourself about it changed everything. This shared foundation reveals a stunning truth. The most effective tool for managing our inner world is not to change the world first, but to examine the lens through which we see it. This shared cognitive map leads directly to a practical tool, a method for navigating life's inevitable challenges. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. It is a simple, powerful act of sorting. They taught that some things are within our power and some things are not. Within our power are our own judgments, our desires, our impulses, and our actions. Everything else, from the weather to the opinions of others, from our health to our wealth, is outside our direct control. Epictetus began his famous handbook with this very instruction. He wrote, "Some things are in our control and others not." The entire philosophy is built on this foundation of discernment. The goal was not indifference but clarity. By clearly distinguishing between the two realms, a person could stop wasting precious emotional energy fighting the unchangeable and instead invest all their effort into mastering their own internal world, the one area where they truly held sovereignty. A Stoic facing a storm that delayed their voyage would not rage against the wind. They would identify it as an external, uncontrollable event and then turn their attention inward to the only thing they could command: their own patience, their adaptability, their calm judgment in the face of the delay. This ancient act of sorting finds its precise counterpart in modern therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy provides the modern vocabulary and techniques for the same internal work. Where the Stoic sees an uncontrollable external event, the CBT practitioner helps a client identify the automatic thoughts it triggers. These are often cognitive distortions, patterns of irrational and unhelpful thinking that magnify our suffering. Think of all or nothing thinking, where a single setback means total failure, or catastrophizing, where a minor problem is imagined as a disaster, or mind reading, where we assume we know what others are negatively thinking about us. These distortions are the modern equivalent of flawed Stoic judgments, the views we take of events that are not within our control. The therapeutic process is to catch these distorted thoughts, examine them for evidence, and challenge them with more rational, balanced perspectives. This is the active, disciplined work of focusing energy on the internal, controllable response. For instance, after a social event, someone might have the automatic thought, "Everyone thought I was boring." That is a distortion, likely mind reading and perhaps overgeneralization. The CBT work is to challenge that, to ask, what is the actual evidence for that? Did anyone actually say that? Could there be other explanations? By doing so, they are not trying to control others' thoughts, an external impossibility, but are taking command of their own internal narrative, which is entirely within their power. The parallel is unmistakable. The Stoic dichotomy of control is the philosophical principle, the map. The CBT process of identifying and challenging cognitive distortions is the clinical methodology, the step-by-step journey on that map. Both direct us to the same liberating realization. Our peace of mind does not depend on controlling the uncontrollable world. It depends on rigorously managing our interpretations of it. When we stop arguing with reality and start examining our thoughts about reality, we reclaim an immense personal power. This is not passive acceptance but proactive internal governance. The storm is not in your power, but your preparation, your resilience, and your calm during the storm. Those are your domain. The criticism from a colleague is not in your power, but your interpretation of it, your decision to learn from it or let it go, that is your sovereign territory. Both ancient and modern wisdom insist that this is where true freedom and resilience are built, not in a perfect life, but in a well-managed mind. Reason is the tool they both hand you. It is not cold calculation, but a clarifying light. The Stoics called the ideal state of being a life lived in accordance with nature. This was not about living in the woods, but about aligning with the highest nature of a human being, which they identified as our capacity for rational thought. To live irrationally, driven by unchecked passions and distorted judgments, was to live contrary to your own design, like a bird trying to swim or a fish trying to fly. Peace was found in using your rational faculty to discern what is true, what is good, and what is within your power. Marcus Aurelius, in his private meditations, constantly appealed to his own reason as a guide. He would write reminders to himself, logical arguments to dismantle his own anger or anxiety. When faced with a frustrating person, he did not just fume. He would reason through it. He might tell himself, this person acts this way because they believe it is right. My job is not to control their belief, but to maintain my own virtue. This was not suppression, but a conscious, logical redirection of his mind's energy. The irrational belief, the knee-jerk judgment, was treated as a mistake in perception, a flaw in logic to be corrected through disciplined thinking. It was an error, not an identity. Your anger was not who you were. It was a faulty conclusion you had drawn, and you had the rational tools to redraw it. This exact same elevation of reason defines the modern therapeutic room. Cognitive behavioral therapy is often described as a collaborative, scientific process. The therapist and client work together not as a guru and disciple, but as two investigators examining the evidence. An automatic thought arises, I will never succeed at this. The CBT process asks, what is the evidence for that belief, and what is the evidence against it? This is a direct, logical inquiry. The client is guided to look at their past experiences, their current capabilities, and alternative explanations with the dispassionate eye of a scientist testing a hypothesis. The irrational belief is exposed not as a deep truth about the self, but as a cognitive distortion, a logical error like overgeneralization or mental filtering. The therapeutic power comes from this realization. You are not a broken person haunted by immutable flaws. You are a rational being who has learned some unhelpful, illogical thinking habits. And just as you learn them, you can, through practice and reason, unlearn them. This is profoundly empowering. It removes the stigma. Anxiety is not a monster in your basement. It is a series of faulty predictions your mind is making, predictions you can logically question. Depression is not a permanent cloud. It is often a pattern of negative thoughts about the self, the world, and the future, thoughts that can be examined for their factual basis. Both traditions, separated by centuries, converge on this radical idea. Our most painful emotions often stem from bad logic. The Stoic sees a passion as a sickness of the soul caused by false judgment. The CBT therapist sees dysfunctional emotions as the product of irrational beliefs. The treatment in both cases is the application of conscious, deliberate reason. It is the slow, patient work of taking the chaotic, convincing narrative our minds spin and holding it up to the light of simple questions. Is this thought absolutely true? What is another way to see this? What would I tell a friend who had this thought? This is not positive thinking. It is accurate thinking. It is the commitment to aligning your internal world with reality, not with your fears. When reason becomes your primary tool, you stop being a victim of your thoughts and start being their editor. The storm of emotion does not vanish, but you are no longer standing in the rain without a shelter. You have built a structure of clarity, piece by logical piece, where you can wait out the weather and see clearly again. This logical framework, this shared architecture of the mind, did not stop at theory. It demanded a daily practice, a way to turn philosophy and therapy into lived experience. The logical architecture of the mind required its own practical engineers. One of the most vivid examples of this bridge across time is found in two men who never met, yet spoke the same language of the soul. On one side, Lucius Annaeus Seneca, the Roman statesman and Stoic philosopher. On the other, Albert Ellis, the 20th century psychologist who founded rational emotive behavior therapy, a direct forerunner of cognitive behavioral therapy. Their methods are so strikingly similar that reading Seneca's letters can feel like listening to an ancient therapy session. Seneca spent a lifetime observing the root of human suffering. He saw it not in events themselves, but in what he called our opinions and desires, particularly the irrational, rigid ones. In his famous letters to his friend Lucilius, he acted as a philosophical guide, using relentless logic to calm emotional storms. A person might write to him in distress over a financial loss, consumed by the belief that life was now unbearable without that wealth. Seneca would not offer empty comfort. He would dispute the belief itself. He would argue logically, asking questions that exposed the irrational demand at the heart of the pain. Is money truly the source of happiness? Did you not live well before you had it? Is your character, your integrity, your capacity for joy actually diminished by this loss? He would dismantle the catastrophic story piece by piece, replacing it with a more rational, adaptable perspective. His tool was disputation, a calm but firm examination of the faulty reasoning causing the turmoil. Now listen to the voice of Albert Ellis over 1900 years later. He developed the ABC model, a core tool of his therapy. A is the activating event, the setback or criticism. C is the emotional consequence, the anxiety or depression. But Ellis insisted that it does not cause C. The cause is B, the belief system, and he focused on a specific type of toxic belief, what he called irrational musts. I must be perfect, you must treat me fairly, the world must be easy. Ellis saw these absolute demands as the primary source of our emotional distress. When life inevitably fails to meet these impossible musts, we collapse into despair or rage. His therapeutic style was famously direct, even confrontational, in a way that echoes Seneca's blunt letters. He would challenge a client's musts with logical force. Why must you succeed? Where is it written that life should be fair? He would show them, through reason, how they were creating their own misery by clinging to these rigid, unprovable commandments. The parallel is uncanny. Seneca disputing the irrational desire for wealth is Ellis disputing the irrational must for approval. Both men bypassed the surface emotion to attack the underlying cognitive error. Both used Socratic questioning and logical argument as their primary instruments of change. They shared a core conviction that people are not disturbed by things, but by the rigid views they hold about those things, and that freedom comes from a philosophical shake-up, from rigorously questioning those views until they loosen their grip. Ellis himself openly credited the Stoics as a direct inspiration for his work. He did not see himself as inventing something new, but as rediscovering and systematizing an ancient form of psychological wisdom. In their hands, philosophy and therapy were not separate disciplines. They were both the art of living by reason, the practice of using your own mind to heal your own heart. This was not a gentle reassurance, but an active, sometimes challenging collaboration with reality. And this collaboration found its most intimate expression not in public lectures or therapy manuals, but in a private, daily ritual of self-examination. The most powerful therapy can happen in complete silence, in the pages of a private notebook. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, never intended his writings for publication. His work, known as Meditations, was a personal journal, a series of notes written to himself during military campaigns and the exhausting duties of ruling an empire. In its pages we find not grand proclamations, but a quiet, relentless conversation a man is having with his own mind. He is catching his thoughts in the act. He observes an impulse to anger, a surge of anxiety about the future, a moment of vanity or pride, and then, with deliberate calm, he speaks back to them. He labels these impulses as mere impressions, not commands. He reframes a frustrating person's behavior by considering their ignorance or their own pain. He reminds himself of the vastness of the cosmos to shrink a personal worry to its proper size. This is not passive diary keeping. It is active, disciplined cognitive restructuring, happening 2,000 years before the term was invented. Marcus was identifying what a modern therapist would call automatic negative thoughts, those swift, judgmental reactions that color our world, and he was systematically challenging them with wiser, more objective perspectives. He was his own therapist, using the blank page as a tool to create distance between his conscious self and the chaotic chatter of his mind. Now bring that image forward to the 1960s. A psychiatrist named Beck is listening to his patients with depression, and he notices a pattern. Their stream of consciousness as they talk is filled with a constant, low-grade commentary of self-criticism, hopelessness, and defeat. Beck called these automatic negative thoughts. They were not deep philosophical beliefs, but quick, fleeting, yet powerful judgments that popped into awareness automatically, shaping mood and behavior. To help his clients, Beck developed a simple, brilliant tool, the thought record. It was a structured way to do what Marcus Aurelius had done instinctively. When a painful emotion arose, the client would write down the situation, the automatic thought, and then the more balanced, evidence-based alternative. The act of writing forced a pause, a moment of observation. It externalized the thought, making it an object to be examined, not an unquestioned truth. The parallel is breathtaking. Marcus, in his tent, writing, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness," and then reframing it, "I can have no complaint against any of them, for I cannot be angry with my kin or feel estranged from him." This is a man identifying a distorted impression, the expectation that people should behave perfectly, and replacing it with a realistic, compassionate perspective. Beck's patient filling out a column on a worksheet, writing automatic thought, "I am a complete failure because my presentation was not perfect," and then, in the evidence column, alternative thought, "I received positive feedback on 2 key points, and 1 imperfect presentation does not define my entire career." Both are engaged in the same fundamental act of mental hygiene. They are not denying the difficulty of the situation. They are changing their relationship to the thoughts the situation provokes. The emperor's meditations and the patient's thought records serve the same purpose: to break the automatic link between event and suffering by inserting a moment of conscious, reasoned choice. This journaling, this logging of the mind's activity, transforms the inner world from a prison of reactions into a workshop of responses. It turns the self into both the observed and the observer, creating the space where change becomes possible. What does it tell us that the same healing mechanism was discovered by a solitary ruler grappling with the weight of an empire and a clinical researcher methodically studying the patterns of sadness? It tells us this tool is not a product of any one culture or era, but a fundamental feature of a mind seeking its own freedom. And this freedom was never meant to be a solitary achievement, but a skill honed for engagement with the very world it helps us endure. The blank page became a mirror for the mind, a space for deliberate and honest reflection. This practice of written self-examination was not a modern innovation, but a core Stoic exercise known as the evening review. At the day's end, a practitioner would sit quietly and replay the events, not to dwell on gossip or drama, but to conduct a rigorous audit of their own judgments and actions. They would ask themselves pointed questions. Where did I act contrary to my principles? When was I ruled by a fleeting passion instead of reasoned choice? Did I confuse what was within my power with what was not? The goal was not self-flagellation, but clear-sighted learning. It was a structured way to catch the subtle cognitive errors, the moments when their internal narrative veered away from virtue and into distortion. This nightly ritual was a systematic cultivation of metacognition, the act of thinking about your own thinking. It created a pause between impulse and identity, allowing a person to see their reactions as objects of study rather than unchangeable truths. A Stoic might note, "I felt sharp anger when my colleague dismissed my idea. Upon review, I see this came from my judgment that my worth was being denied. My worth, however, is not in his hands but in my own actions. Tomorrow, I can present my idea again with calm conviction, or choose to let it go if it is not within my control." This is not just diary writing, it is cognitive therapy in its most ancient form. Now, bring that forward into any modern therapist's office. A core component of cognitive behavioral therapy is what is called homework. Between sessions, clients are often asked to keep daily thought records or mood logs. The structure is remarkably similar to that Stoic review. When a strong, difficult emotion arises, the individual is guided to write down the triggering situation, the automatic thought that flashed through their mind, the resulting feeling, and then to craft a more balanced, evidence-based alternative thought. This is not busy work, it is the clinical systematization of that ancient evening review. It trains the mind to do consciously what the Stoics aspired to do, to intercept the automatic, often irrational story and subject it to the light of reason. Both practices transform the inner monologue from a runaway narration into a documented transcript that can be edited. Furthermore, CBT often employs behavioral experiments, which are like the active, lived extension of this journaling. If a person's automatic thought is, "If I speak up in the meeting, everyone will think I am foolish," the therapeutic assignment might be to test that belief. Speak up once and observe the actual outcome. This is the modern equivalent of the Stoic testing their judgment against reality, moving from philosophical reflection into practical engagement. The shared heartbeat of these practices, separated by millennia, is metacognition. The Stoic evening review and the CBT thought record are both tools to achieve that crucial distance. They force you to step outside the stream of your consciousness and stand on the bank, watching the flow of your thoughts, identifying which currents are helpful and which are pulling you under. This is the essence of psychological resilience. It is not about having only positive thoughts. It is about no longer being blindly identified with every thought that passes through. You learn that you are the sky, not the weather. The evening review and the homework assignment are both ways of remembering that you are the sky. They provide the structure to observe the storm clouds of anxiety, the cold fronts of anger, the fog of sadness, without believing you are made of them. This disciplined practice of self-observation turns insight into habit and philosophy into a lived, daily reality. It is how wisdom moves from the pages of a book or the notes of a therapy session into the fabric of your life. And this fabric, woven from examined thoughts, creates a remarkable kind of strength, one that is not about rigid control, but about profound and flexible acceptance. The emperor in his tent and the client with their worksheet were both hunting the same elusive prey, the distorted thought. Cognitive behavioral therapy gives these distortions clinical names, like a field guide to the mind's trickery. But long before those labels existed, the Stoics were already describing these exact patterns with startling clarity, diagnosing the mental habits that turn manageable challenges into sources of deep suffering. They saw catastrophizing, the act of blowing a single setback into an absolute disaster. Seneca wrote extensively about this, observing how we torture ourselves by anticipating future pains. He noted that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. A person might lose a modest sum of money, but their mind instantly spirals, weaving a narrative of total ruin, poverty, and disgrace. The event is a financial loss. The catastrophic story becomes, "This is the end. I will lose everything. My family will be destitute." Seneca's remedy was to drag that fearful projection back into the light of the present moment. He would argue, you are not experiencing that imagined future disaster right now. You are experiencing a current inconvenience. By focusing on the manageable reality of the present, rather than the terrifying fiction of the future, you reclaim your calm. This is a direct confrontation with the cognitive distortion of catastrophizing, stripping the story of its exaggerated power and returning to the facts at hand. Another common distortion is what CBT calls fortune-telling, assuming you know a negative future outcome with certainty. The Stoics identified this as a fundamental error in judgment, a refusal to accept the inherent uncertainty of life. Epictetus tackled this head-on. He advised his students not to demand that events happen as you wish, but to wish for them to happen as they do happen. This sounds passive, but it is actually a profound cognitive shift against fortune-telling. When you anxiously predict a social gathering will be awful, or a work project will certainly fail, you are suffering in advance for an event that has not occurred and may not occur as you fear. You are living a painful fiction. Epictetus taught the discipline of suspending that negative prediction, of approaching the future not with a script of doom, but with an openness to what actually unfolds. Your peace depends on relinquishing the arrogant certainty of your own negative prophecies. Then there is overgeneralization, taking one instance and applying it as a universal rule. You make a single mistake and conclude, "I always mess things up." A relationship ends and the story becomes, "I am unlovable." The Stoics saw this as a failure of logic, a lazy and painful broadening of a specific event into a false identity. Marcus Aurelius constantly corrected this tendency in his own meditations. When he felt frustrated by the repetitive flaws of people around him, he might have thought, "People are so selfish and ungrateful." But he would stop himself. He would recall that this person's action is just one data point, not a definition of all humanity. He would remind himself to see individuals, not caricatures. He was breaking the chain of overgeneralization, refusing to let a few negative experiences paint his entire worldview. This is the cognitive work of moving from always and never back to sometimes, and in this instance, a shift that dramatically reduces the emotional weight we carry. What is stunning is that these ancient philosophers did not just name these patterns, they understood their emotional mechanics. They saw that catastrophizing leads to paralyzing anxiety. Fortune-telling breeds a constant, low-grade dread. Overgeneralization fuels shame and hopelessness. Their entire philosophical system was in part a structured intervention against these very distortions. When Seneca advises us to limit the scope of our fears to the present moment, he is providing a technique to counter catastrophizing. When Epictetus tells us to focus only on what is within our control right now, he is cutting off the mental energy that feeds fortune-telling. This is not vague wisdom, it is precise cognitive troubleshooting. They were mapping the same treacherous terrain of the human mind that modern therapists would map again, proving that the architecture of our suffering and the pathways out of it may be timeless. This cognitive troubleshooting led to a proactive training of the mind, a mental drill that seems counterintuitive at first. The Stoics practiced an exercise called Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This was not a pessimistic obsession with what could go wrong. It was a deliberate and controlled rehearsal for life's inevitable difficulties. Imagine a sailor before a voyage, not ignoring the possibility of storms, but calmly reviewing the procedures for securing the sails and navigating high waves. The Stoic would do this with life itself. They would set aside quiet time to vividly imagine the loss of a loved one, the failure of a venture, the onset of illness, or even their own passing. They would walk through the scenario in their mind's eye, not to wallow in fear, but to accomplish three profound psychological goals. First, it robbed the future of its power to shock. By confronting a feared possibility in a state of calm reflection, they stripped away the anxiety of the unknown. The event, if it ever came, would feel familiar, manageable, almost expected. The sharp edge of surprise, which so often amplifies our suffering, was dulled in advance. Second, and perhaps most beautifully, this practice acted as a powerful engine for gratitude. By mentally removing the people and comforts they held dear, even for a few moments, they returned to the present with a renewed, visceral appreciation for what they had. The philosopher Seneca advised doing this daily, to love your family, your health, your work, as if you might lose them, for in truth you might. This turns a theoretical understanding of impermanence into a lived feeling of thankfulness. Your morning coffee, the sound of a friend's laughter, the comfort of your home, these are not guaranteed. By consciously acknowledging their fragility, you stop taking them for granted and start truly savoring them. Third, this mental rehearsal built resilience by allowing them to pre-script their response. In the safe theater of the mind, they could practice virtue in the face of adversity. How would I act with courage if I received this bad news? How would I maintain justice if I were treated unfairly? This was not mere daydreaming. It was cognitive and emotional conditioning, strengthening the neural pathways for calm, rational action before a crisis ever demanded it. Now, listen to the language of modern psychology. Therapists use a technique called stress inoculation training. Just as a vaccine introduces a weakened virus to build immunity, this therapy introduces manageable levels of stress in a controlled setting to build psychological resistance. A person with a fear of public speaking might start by imagining giving a talk, then progress to speaking in front of a mirror, then to a small, supportive group. They are rehearsing the feared scenario in graduated steps, exactly like the Stoics' mental walk through hardship. Similarly, coping rehearsal in cognitive behavioral therapy asks clients to imagine a challenging situation and then mentally practice the specific, healthy coping skills they have learned, like deep breathing or using a balanced thought. The parallel is exact. Both the ancient philosopher and the modern therapist understand that resilience is not a trait you are born with, but a skill you build through deliberate, repeated practice. The Stoics' Premeditation malorum is the philosophical blueprint for stress inoculation. It is the recognition that by willingly engaging with difficulty in our imagination, we disarm its terror in reality. We move from being passive victims of circumstance to active architects of our own fortitude. The goal was never to live in a shadow of dread, but to walk in the sunlight of the present, unafraid of the clouds, because you have already learned how to navigate the rain. This mental rehearsal required a final, crucial skill, the ability to step back from your own mind. Imagine holding a photograph too close to your eyes. All you see is a blur of colors and shapes, overwhelming and meaningless. To understand the image, you must lower it, creating distance. The Stoics perfected a form of mental distance they called the view from above. When gripped by a powerful emotion, a personal slight, a burning ambition, or a deep worry, they would consciously pull their perspective upward and outward. They would visualize themselves not as the solitary figure at the center of the drama, but as a tiny part of a vast, interconnected whole. Marcus Aurelius was a master of this. In the midst of political intrigue or military stress, he would write reminders to himself to look at things in accordance with nature. He would contemplate the grand scale of the cosmos, the endless flow of time, the billions of lives that had come before and would come after. From that cosmic balcony, his immediate problem did not vanish, but it was framed in its true proportion. A rude comment from a senator was not a world-ending event, but a brief, insignificant sound in the symphony of human interaction. This was not about dismissing genuine hardship, but about seeing it within its proper context, stripping away the ego's magnification. The goal was to see the event as it truly was, a neutral occurrence in the natural world, not as the personal catastrophe our frightened minds often paint it to be. This philosophical zooming out finds its precise clinical counterpart in a core cognitive behavioral therapy technique known as cognitive distancing, or sometimes diffusion. Modern therapists observed that psychological suffering often comes from fusion, the state where we become completely entangled with our thoughts. We do not have a thought that I am a failure. We become the failure. The thought and the self are fused into one painful identity. Diffusion is the process of creating space between you and that thought. It involves learning to see thoughts for what they are, transient mental events, not unchanging truths. A common diffusion exercise is to simply notice a thought and label it. Instead of I am a failure, you learn to say, I am having the thought that I am a failure. That tiny shift in language creates a world of distance. It turns the thought from a command etched in stone into a passing cloud in the sky of your awareness. Another technique is to imagine your thoughts as leaves floating down a stream or as text scrolling on a computer screen. You watch them come and go without needing to grab onto them or argue with them. This is not suppression. You are fully aware of the difficult thought, but you are no longer wrestling with it inside your own skin. You have moved from being submerged in the river of your thinking to sitting on the bank, observing the current. The parallel between the Stoic view from above and the therapeutic practice of diffusion is profound. Both are methods of metacognition, of changing your relationship to your internal experience. Marcus Aurelius, looking down from the cosmos, is doing the same work as the client watching their thoughts float by on leaves. Both are stepping out of the first-person, overwhelmed perspective and into a wiser, more observational stance. The Stoic asks, in the grand scheme of nature, does this event truly matter? The CBT practitioner asks, is this thought a fact, or is it just a story my mind is telling me? Both questions achieve the same liberation. They reduce the emotional voltage of the experience. Anger, when viewed from the perspective of a 1,000-year-old mountain, loses its fiery urgency. Anxiety, when seen as a string of words generated by a brain trying to protect you, loses its grip on your identity. This cognitive distance is the ultimate freedom the ancient and modern systems promise. It is the realization that you are not your thoughts, and you are not your circumstances. You are the conscious space in which both arise and pass away. You are the sky, not the weather. The view from above and the practice of diffusion are both ways of remembering you are the sky. When you can watch your own mind with the gentle curiosity of a naturalist observing a fascinating creature, you have unlocked a peace that no external event can ever take from you. This distance from our thoughts creates a space for something vital, action. Both traditions insist that insight alone is not enough. A well-examined mind must be expressed through a purposeful life. The Stoics called this virtue, but they defined it not as a passive moral purity, but as excellence in action. For them, virtue was the art of living well, of doing the right thing in each moment, guided by wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. Crucially, this action was not dependent on feeling. A Stoic did not wait to feel courageous before acting courageously. They understood that the right action itself, taken despite fear or reluctance, was what cultivated the virtue of courage within them. Marcus Aurelius, drained and weary, still attended to the duties of governance because it was the just thing to do. His action was not fueled by a wave of inspiration, but by a committed alignment with his role in the world. The feeling might follow or it might not, but the action was non-negotiable. This turns the common formula on its head. We often believe we must feel motivated to act. Stoicism proposes we act according to our principles, and integrity becomes its own reward, often reshaping our feelings in the process. It is a philosophy of doing, where character is built brick by brick through daily choices, not through lofty intentions alone. Now, listen to a core technique from modern cognitive behavioral therapy, especially for challenges like depression. It is called behavioral activation. When a person is caught in a cycle of low mood, they often withdraw. They stop engaging in activities they once enjoyed. They avoid social contact. They retreat because they have no motivation. The depressive loop tells them, I will do it when I feel better. But the inactivity deepens the low mood, which further kills motivation, creating a prison of inertia. Behavioral activation breaks this loop with a simple, powerful directive. You do not wait to feel better to act. You act in small, manageable ways to begin feeling better. A therapist will work with a client to identify values-driven activities, actions that align with what is meaningful to them, even in a small way. It could be as simple as making a meal, taking a 5-minute walk, or sending a text to a friend. The instruction is to schedule and complete these actions regardless of the current emotional weather. The goal is not the outcome of the activity, but the act of engagement itself. This is not about fake positivity. It is about re-establishing a connection between action and experience, proving to the brain that movement is possible and that small victories can create a ripple of momentum. The parallel is profound. The Stoic practicing virtuous action by fulfilling a duty despite weariness is the ancient echo of the client practicing behavioral activation by taking a walk despite sadness. Both systems identify a critical truth about human psychology, that we are not just thinking beings but doing beings. Our behaviors shape our inner world as much as our thoughts do. Passivity and withdrawal feed despair. Purposeful engagement, even when it feels mechanical at first, rebuilds agency and often alters the emotional landscape. The Stoic focuses on action as the expression of character. The CBT protocol uses action as a lever to shift mood and disrupt negative thought patterns. They meet at the same crossroads, understanding that sometimes the most effective way to change how you feel is to change what you do. This is where philosophy and therapy roll up their sleeves. It is the commitment to move, to engage, to participate in life, not when conditions are perfect, but precisely when they are not. That next step, however small, taken without the guarantee of feeling ready, is where resilience is forged in real time. That purposeful action leads us to a deeper question. What is all this mental work actually for? Both traditions point toward a destination, but it is not a place of permanent happiness or a life free from pain. The ancient Stoics had a word for their ultimate aim, Eudemonia. This is often translated as happiness or flourishing, but that can be misleading. For the Stoics, eudaimonia was not a fleeting feeling of joy, but a state of living fully in accordance with your nature as a rational, social being. It meant embodying virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control, not as abstract ideals, but as the daily practice of navigating life with excellence. Eudaimonia was the result of a life well lived, a deep sense of fulfillment that came from knowing you were acting with integrity, regardless of the external rewards or hardships. It was a functional goal measured by the quality of your character and your actions, not by the smiles on your face. A Stoic could experience eudaimonia even in moments of grief or physical challenge, because their sense of worth was anchored in their virtuous response, not in the circumstance itself. Their goal was to build a self that could not be shattered by fortune, a life of meaning derived from within. Shift the lens to modern psychology, and you find a remarkably similar destination described in different language. The contemporary aim, particularly in therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy which evolved from CBT, is psychological flexibility. This is the ability to be fully present in the here and now, to be open to your thoughts and feelings without being controlled by them, and to take actions that align with your deeply held values, even when it is difficult. Notice the structure. It is not about eliminating anxiety or sadness. It is about developing the capacity to feel those things, acknowledge them, and still move your life in a meaningful direction. Psychological flexibility means you can have the thought, "I am not good enough," and still choose to apply for the promotion because growth is a value. It means you can feel the nervousness before a social event and still walk through the door because connection matters to you. The goal is not to feel good all the time. The goal is to live well, guided by what you care about most. When you place these two aims side by side, the alignment is striking. Both eudaimonia and psychological flexibility are process-oriented. They are not static end states you achieve and then forget. They are dynamic skills, a way of moving through the world. The Stoic pursues virtue through the continuous practice of right judgment and right action. The psychologically flexible individual pursues a valued life through the continuous practice of acceptance, mindfulness, and committed action. Both frameworks explicitly reject the pursuit of mere pleasure or the simple absence of distress as a sufficient goal for a human life. A life spent avoiding all pain is a narrow, confined life. A life spent chasing only pleasure is a reactive, shallow one. Instead, they propose something far more robust and enduring, a life built on adaptive living. This is where the wisdom of Two Millennia converges most powerfully. The ultimate aim is not to control your internal weather, but to learn how to sail skillfully in all conditions. Eudemonia is the quality of the voyage itself, the integrity of the sailor. Psychological flexibility is the toolkit and the navigational skill that makes such a voyage possible. They both understand that a rich, meaningful human life will contain storms. The goal is not to find a sea that is always calm, an impossible and hollow quest, but to become so competent and resilient a navigator that you can journey toward your chosen horizon, whatever the winds may bring. This transforms our understanding of well-being from something we feel to something we do, a daily choice to engage with life on its own terms, guided by our own deepest principles. This self-reliance defines a crucial difference in their methods. The Stoic philosopher was in essence their own therapist. They had no office to visit, no scheduled hour to unpack their thoughts with a trained guide. Their entire system was engineered for self-administration. The tools were deliberately portable, a philosophy carried in the mind and practiced in the marketplace. The evening review was a private audit. The premeditation of evils was a solitary mental drill. The writings of Seneca or Epictetus were not academic texts, but direct conversations with the reader, designed to be read slowly, reflected upon, and internalized as a personal guide. The relationship was a dialogue between the individual and the wisdom of the tradition, mediated through their own disciplined reflection. This required immense personal responsibility and a commitment to daily practice, turning philosophy into a kind of rigorous mental hygiene performed alone. In contrast, modern cognitive behavioral therapy, in its standard clinical form, is fundamentally collaborative. It is built on the therapeutic alliance, a partnership between a client and a trained professional. This relationship provides structure, accountability, and an external, compassionate mirror. The therapist helps identify blind spots in thinking, offers expert guidance through techniques, and provides support when the work feels overwhelming. The client brings their lived experience, and together they investigate the patterns of the mind. This guided journey can be profoundly effective, especially for entrenched or complex patterns of thought, because it leverages an outside perspective we often cannot grant ourselves. So we have two models, one of solitary philosophical discipline and one of professional partnership. Yet the story does not end with this contrast. In many ways, modern psychology has come full circle, creating a bridge back to that Stoic ideal of self-guided care. The rise of evidence-based self-help books, online CBT programs, and bibliotherapy represents a massive shift. These are structured, therapeutic tools designed for individuals to use on their own time. A workbook on managing anxiety, for example, will walk a person through the very same steps a therapist would, teaching them to identify automatic thoughts, challenge cognitive distortions, and conduct behavioral experiments. This is not a replacement for professional therapy when it is needed, but it is a democratization of the tools. It returns to a model of guided self-treatment, where the book or the program acts as the structured external guide, and the individual does the daily practice. This modern bibliotherapy is the direct descendant of the Stoics' dog-eared copy of Epictetus. Both assume that with the right map and the right exercises, a person can cultivate their own resilience. They empower the individual to become an active participant in their own mental well-being, blending the ancient responsibility of the Stoic with the structured, evidence-based methods of modern science. This convergence suggests a powerful synthesis. Perhaps the most robust approach to mental fitness combines the best of both worlds, the supportive guidance of a professional when necessary, and the daily, personal discipline of turning insight into habit. It recognizes that while we may sometimes need a coach to learn the form, the practice itself is a lifelong personal endeavor. The ultimate goal, after all, is not to be in therapy forever, but to internalize the therapist's voice, to make those rational, compassionate questions your own. In that aim, the Stoic and the modern seeker are exactly the same, learning to become their own wisest companion. This synthesis of self-guidance and structured support leads to a final, transformative skill. At the heart of both ancient and modern practice lies a sophisticated form of acceptance. For the Stoics, acceptance was the bedrock of wisdom. It was the clear-eyed, courageous act of seeing reality exactly as it is, without the filter of our wishes or fears. This was never about passive resignation, a kind of giving up. It was the exact opposite, an active and strategic starting point. Before you can navigate a river, you must first acknowledge its current, its depth, and the fact that you are already in it. The Stoic would call this amor fati, the love of fate. It means to not merely tolerate what happens, but to embrace it as the necessary raw material for your life's work. When Epictetus, born into slavery, accepted his condition, he was not saying it was good or just. He was acknowledging the unchangeable fact of his circumstance, so he could focus his immense energy on the one thing he could change, his own mind. His acceptance was the solid ground from which his philosophical freedom could grow. It was the prerequisite for any truly effective action. To fight against an unchangeable fact is to exhaust yourself in a battle you cannot win. To accept it is to conserve all your strength for the battles you can, those within your own sphere of control. This is the profound logic of Stoic acceptance. It is the decision to stop arguing with reality so you can start working with it. This very same principle forms the core of a modern evolution in therapy. In what are called the third wave cognitive behavioral therapies, particularly acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, acceptance is not a side note, it is the central mechanism of change. Traditional CBT often focuses on challenging and changing the content of negative thoughts. ACT introduces a subtle but revolutionary shift. It suggests that the struggle to control or eliminate difficult thoughts and feelings is often the very source of our suffering. The more you fight a feeling of anxiety, the more power you give it. The more you try to suppress a sad thought, the louder it echoes. ACT teaches psychological acceptance, which means making room for these experiences, allowing them to be present without letting them dictate your actions. It is like allowing a storm to rage in the sky while you remain rooted on the ground. You feel the wind, you see the rain, but you are not the storm. This acceptance is the vital first step in the ACT model, which is encapsulated in its name. Acceptance of your internal experience comes first, so that you can move to the second part, committed action, which is taking steps that align with your values. The parallel here is exquisite. The Stoics' clear-eyed acknowledgement of an external reality, like an illness or a loss, is mirrored by the ACT practitioner's willing embrace of an internal reality, like anxiety or grief. Both understand that resistance is futile and exhausting. The Stoic accepts the diagnosis so they can focus on living with dignity and purpose within it. The person in therapy accepts the presence of anxious thoughts so they can still go to the social event that matters to them. In both cases, acceptance is the gate that opens to freedom. It transfers energy from a futile war with what is into a meaningful engagement with what can be done. Acceptance is the moment you drop the heavy rope in a tug of war you are never going to win. It is not defeat. It is the strategic decision to stop playing that game altogether, so you can turn and walk towards something that truly matters. This is the ultimate destination of both journeys, a life not free from pain but rich with purpose, guided by values you choose, and lived with an open heart and a clear mind. Anger offers a perfect test case for these two systems in action. It is a universal, fiery emotion that both ancient philosophy and modern therapy sought not to eliminate, but to understand and master. Let us see how a Roman Stoic and a contemporary therapist would approach the same burning feeling. Seneca, the philosopher and statesman, wrote an entire essay titled On Anger. He did not see anger as a righteous force, but as a temporary madness. He argued that anger is never useful because it is, by definition, a loss of rational control. It begins, he said, with a judgment, a specific story we tell ourselves. We perceive an injustice, a personal slight, or a blocked goal. That perception is not the anger itself. The anger is our assent to that story, our explosive agreement with the belief that we have been wronged and must retaliate. Seneca described its progression like a falling building, first a spark of agitation, then a flame of assent, and finally a blaze that consumes reason. His prescribed remedy was profoundly cognitive. First, introduce a mandatory cooling-off period. At the very first flicker of agitation, impose a delay. Do not speak, do not act, wait. This simple pause creates the space between the triggering event and your reaction, the very space where freedom resides. Second, during that pause, engage in a deliberate perspective shift. Challenge the initial judgment of injustice. Ask yourself, is this person truly acting out of malice, or could they be ignorant, stressed, or acting from their own pain? Is my interpretation of the event the only possible one? By dissecting the story that sparked the anger, you deprive it of fuel. Seneca was essentially teaching his readers to catch and dispute their automatic thoughts 2,000 years before the term existed. Now, observe a standard cognitive behavioral therapy protocol for anger management. The first step is almost identical: recognition and pause. Clients are taught to identify the physical cues of rising anger, the clenched jaw, the quickened pulse, and to use that as a signal to stop. This is the behavioral equivalent of Seneca's cooling-off period. The next step is to identify the trigger thoughts. What was the specific belief that flashed through your mind in that moment? Common anger-triggering thoughts include, "They did that on purpose to disrespect me," or "This is unfair and I can't stand it," or "They are a terrible person." Notice these are judgments, exactly what Seneca described. The CBT process then guides the individual to challenge these thoughts. Is there evidence they did it on purpose? Can I think of another explanation? Is this situation truly unbearable, or is it just highly inconvenient? This cognitive restructuring directly mirrors Seneca's perspective shift. Finally, both systems move toward calming strategies and problem solving. Once the cognitive heat is lowered, you can decide on an effective response if one is needed. The goal in both frameworks is not to become a person who never feels irritation, but to become a person who is not ruled by it. The anger may arise, but you choose whether to let it dictate your words and actions. Seneca's essay and a modern therapist's worksheet are guiding you through the same mental operation, intercepting a judgment, examining it with reason, and choosing a response aligned with your deeper values rather than a fleeting surge of passion. This parallel reveals that the path to self-mastery, whether paved with ancient maxims or modern psychology, runs through the same landscape of the mind. Anxiety is a whisper about a future that has not yet arrived. It spins stories of what might go wrong, weaving possibilities into certainties, and it thrives on a mind stretched thin between an unchangeable past and an unpredictable future. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who knew profound hardship from his early life, offered a direct and powerful antidote. He instructed his students to confine their attention strictly to two things: the present moment and what is within their power. This was not a platitude, but a surgical strike against anxiety's core mechanism. Anxiety loses its grip when you pull your mind back from the terrifying fiction of tomorrow and anchor it in the manageable reality of now. Epictetus would ask, are you suffering because of something happening at this very second? Or are you suffering because of a story your mind is telling about what could happen? He taught that we are often haunted not by present facts but by future phantoms of our own creation. By focusing on the present, you dismantle the catastrophic narrative piece by piece. What can you actually do right now? Perhaps you can breathe. You can observe your surroundings. You can choose a single, small, constructive action. This discipline of present focus directly attacks the fuel of anxiety, which is almost always an overestimation of future threat and an underestimation of present capacity. This ancient prescription finds its precise clinical application in modern treatments for persistent worry, known as generalized anxiety disorder. Cognitive behavioral therapy provides structured techniques that are, in essence, operational versions of Epictetus's wisdom. One common intervention is called worry postponement. A person caught in a spiral of what-if thoughts is taught to acknowledge the worry, but then to schedule a specific time later in the day to think about it, say for 20 minutes at 5 p.m. This simple act performs two crucial functions. First, it breaks the compulsive, immediate cycle of anxious rumination, creating that vital Stoic pause. Second, it demonstrates cognitively that the worry is not an emergency requiring constant attention. It is a mental event that can be managed and contained. When the appointed time arrives, the worry often feels less urgent, its power diminished by the act of postponement. Another key CBT strategy is to directly challenge probability overestimations, the mind's tendency to turn a 1% chance of something bad into a 99% certainty. A therapist will guide a client to examine the actual evidence. What is the realistic likelihood of this feared outcome? How many times has a similar worry actually come true? This is the rational, evidence-based examination of the catastrophic story, mirroring the Stoic practice of testing judgments against reality. By quantifying the worry, you drain its emotional intensity and see it for what it often is, a low-probability event magnified by fear. Perhaps the most direct parallel, however, is found in the integration of mindfulness into modern therapy. Mindfulness, the practice of non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, is a cornerstone of many contemporary approaches. It trains the brain to notice worried thoughts as they arise, to label them gently, there is the worrying mind again, and to return attention to the anchor of the breath or the sensations of the body. This is Epictetus's focus on the present, codified into a teachable skill. It does not try to argue with the worry or make it go away. Instead, it creates space around it. You learn that you are not your anxiety, you are the awareness that observes the anxiety. This cognitive distancing, this view from above applied to internal weather, is profoundly liberating. A person waiting for important news might feel a surge of panic. The Stoic response would be to note that the news is not within their control at this moment, and to focus instead on the control they do have over their breath, their posture, their next action. The mindfulness-informed CBT response would be to notice the physical feeling of panic, name it, and gently guide attention back to the feeling of the feet on the floor. Both pathways lead to the same destination, a reclamation of the present moment from the tyranny of an imagined future. The goal in both frameworks is not to never feel a flutter of nervousness, but to prevent that flutter from becoming a storm that dictates your life. By training the mind to dwell in what is actual rather than what is possible, you build a resilience that is not based on certainty, but on a deep trust in your ability to meet the present, whatever it may hold. The bridge between the ancient and modern is not a straight line, but a river flowing underground for centuries. While Beck and Ellis did not pull copies of Seneca directly from their shelves, they were breathing the intellectual air of a culture still shaped by Stoic currents. Their revolutionary work did not emerge in a philosophical vacuum. Instead, it was the culmination of a long tradition of Western thought that had absorbed and carried forward the core Stoic insight that our thoughts shape our reality. To understand the modern rediscovery, we must trace that underground river. The Enlightenment philosophers like Spinoza and Kant grappled with reason's power over passion. The 19th century saw the rise of rationalist and pragmatic schools of thought, all emphasizing the role of individual perception and belief. This was the intellectual soil in which the seeds of cognitive therapy were planted. Ellis, in particular, was openly philosophical in his approach. A trained psychoanalyst who became disillusioned with its methods, he turned explicitly toward philosophy as a source of practical wisdom. He read widely in existential and humanistic thought, but the framework he built for rational emotive behavior therapy bears an unmistakable Stoic imprint. He himself acknowledged this lineage. Ellis stated that his central premise, that emotional disturbance stems from irrational beliefs, was influenced by ancient philosophers, specifically naming thinkers who held Stoic-like views. He did not claim to be reinventing Stoicism, but rather systematizing a psychological truth that philosophy had long pointed toward. His famous ABC model is essentially a clinical unpacking of Epictetus's dictum. Where the Stoic spoke of views, Ellis identified irrational musts. The therapeutic disputation he championed mirrors the relentless logical questioning found in Seneca's letters. This was not a coincidence, but a recognition. Ellis saw that these ancient thinkers were doing a form of proto-cognitive therapy, using dialogue and reason to alleviate human suffering. Beck's path was more clinical and research-driven, yet the philosophical water table was the same. Trained in a medical model, he arrived at the cognitive theory through meticulous observation of his patients' thought patterns. While his language was scientific, the structure he revealed, the idea that automatic thoughts mediate between event and emotion, perfectly aligned with the older philosophical model. The modern rediscovery, then, is a story of convergence. Two brilliant minds working in the mid-20th century, one from an explicitly philosophical starting point and the other from a clinical one, arrived at the same map of the mind that had been drawn in Rome and Athens. They provided the empirical evidence, the structured techniques, and the clinical validation for what had been, for 2 millennia, a wisdom tradition. This gave the ancient tools a new authority and a new accessibility, transforming them from philosophical advice into evidence-based therapeutic protocol. The river had finally surfaced, its waters clear and ready for anyone to drink. That underground river of philosophy now met the clear, fast-flowing stream of modern science. This intersection marks the most significant divergence between the two traditions, and it is precisely what turned timeless wisdom into a repeatable treatment. The Stoics built their system through deep philosophical reasoning and acute personal observation. They were master cartographers of the inner world, drawing maps based on logic, lived experience, and the testimonies of those who practiced their teachings. Their evidence was anecdotal but powerful, the reported tranquility and resilience of individuals from slaves to emperors. It was a wisdom validated by the quality of a life lived, not by data sets. Cognitive behavioral therapy, however, required a different kind of proof to enter the modern world of medicine and psychology. Its ultimate distinction and its greatest strength is its foundation in the scientific method. This was the crucial leap from persuasive philosophy to validated protocol. The transformation began with researchers like Beck, who did not just accept the cognitive model as philosophically elegant. He set out to test it, to gather evidence. He and others developed ways to measure automatic thoughts, to track mood changes, and to design therapeutic techniques with specific steps. Then came the gold standard of modern research, the randomized controlled trial. In these studies, individuals experiencing similar challenges, like persistent anxiety or low mood, would be randomly assigned to different groups. One group might receive cognitive behavioral therapy, another might receive a different treatment or be placed on a waiting list. By comparing outcomes across these groups, researchers could isolate the specific effect of the CBT techniques. The results, compiled over decades and across thousands of studies, provided something the Stoics could never offer: empirical validation. The data showed consistently and measurably that learning to identify and restructure distorted thoughts led to significant and often lasting reductions in suffering. This evidence-based approach did more than just confirm an ancient insight, it refined it. It allowed psychologists to see which techniques worked best for which patterns of thinking. It helped standardize the approach, creating structured protocols that could be taught reliably to therapists anywhere in the world. A modern therapist is not simply dispensing philosophical advice. They are implementing a set of skills with a proven track record, much like a doctor following a clinically tested treatment plan. This empirical backbone is what allows CBT to sit in hospital clinics, to be covered by insurance, and to be recommended by medical bodies worldwide. It transformed the Stoics' personal toolkit into a public health resource. The ancient philosopher pointed the way, saying, "Here is a path that leads to peace. Walk it and see for yourself." The modern clinical researcher, using the tools of science, could now say, "We have studied this path with thousands of travelers. We have mapped its turns, confirmed its destination, and we can teach you the specific steps to walk it effectively." This is not a dismissal of the philosophical approach, but an evolution of it. The scientific method provided the rigorous testing ground that the wisdom of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius never had access to. It added a layer of external, reproducible verification to the internal, subjective truth the Stoics championed. The core map of the mind remained astonishingly similar, but now it was printed with the precise coordinates of clinical evidence. This convergence of ancient insight and modern science offers a unique reassurance. It suggests we are not just dealing with a compelling idea, but with a fundamental principle of human psychology that reveals itself through both introspective wisdom and external experiment. The mind's tendency to suffer from its own stories is not merely a philosophical observation, it is a clinical fact, and the practice of examining those stories is not just a path to wisdom, it is a demonstrably effective way to heal. Yet any powerful comparison deserves a thoughtful look at its boundaries. While the parallels are profound, we must also acknowledge where the ancient and modern paths diverge, for a complete picture requires both light and shadow. The most significant distinction lies in their foundational worldviews. Stoicism was not merely a set of psychological techniques, it was a complete philosophical system built upon a metaphysical foundation. At its heart was the concept of the logos, a rational, divine principle governing the cosmos. For the Stoic, to live in accordance with nature meant aligning one's personal reason with this universal reason, accepting all events as part of a providential, meaningful whole. A setback or a loss was not just a random occurrence, it was a thread woven into a larger, intelligible tapestry. This cosmic perspective provided a deep sense of purpose and acceptance, but it is a framework that modern, secular therapy deliberately avoids. Cognitive behavioral therapy is proudly atheoretical in its metaphysics. It does not ask clients to adopt a belief in a rational universe or a grand plan. Its approach is pragmatic and evidence-based, focused solely on the observable relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The question is not whether the universe is providential, but whether a specific thought is helpful. This is a crucial difference. Stoicism offers a meaning-making system, while CBT offers a functional toolkit. One invites you to see your life as part of a cosmic order. The other equips you to manage the disorder within your own mind. This leads to a second common critique of the ancient practice, the perception that Stoicism advocates for emotional suppression. The stereotype of the unfeeling Stoic, unmoved by grief or joy, is a persistent one. Critics point to passages that speak of extirpating the passions, which can sound like a call to become emotionally numb. This is where a nuanced understanding is essential. The Stoic ideal was not the absence of feeling, but the absence of irrational, overwhelming passion that hijacks reason. They distinguished between healthy proto-feelings, like a natural sting of loss, and full-blown passions, like consuming grief that leads to despair. The goal was to experience the initial feeling without assenting to the catastrophic story that amplifies it. However, the language of eradication can be easily misunderstood, and without careful guidance, the pursuit of apatheia, freedom from destructive passions, could be misapplied as a denial of healthy human emotion. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy navigates this with a clearer clinical distinction. Its goal is never suppression, but emotional regulation. The aim is to reduce the intensity and duration of distressing emotions like debilitating anxiety or profound depression, while increasing the capacity for a full range of emotional experience, including appropriate sadness, justified anger, and authentic joy. A CBT therapist would not tell a grieving client to not feel sad. They would help them process the sadness while challenging thoughts that might lead to a hopeless depression. The modern framework is explicitly designed to increase psychological flexibility, not to promote emotional detachment. Therefore, while the cognitive mechanisms are strikingly similar, the stated goals and the cultural packaging differ. The comparison is not a perfect one-to-one mapping. It is more like recognizing that two master architects, working in different centuries with different materials, arrived at a nearly identical blueprint for a sturdy house. One used the language of divine geometry and built it into a temple complex. The other used the language of engineering and built it as a standalone home. The underlying principles of load-bearing walls and a solid foundation are the same, but the surrounding structures and intended uses are distinct. Recognizing these limits does not weaken the connection, it deepens our appreciation for it. It shows us what is truly universal, the cognitive architecture of resilience, and what is culturally specific, the stories we wrap around that architecture to make sense of our place in the world. The house may share an identical blueprint, but the surrounding landscape is profoundly different. Stoicism was never intended as a mere therapy for the mind. It was a complete philosophy of life, a vast and integrated system with three interdependent branches. Logic provided the tools of clear thinking, the very cognitive skills we have been discussing. Physics was their understanding of the natural world and the rational, divine principle, the logos that they believed governed it. And ethics, the crown of the system, was the art of living well, of applying reason and nature to the daily practice of virtue. For the Stoic, the entire purpose of examining your thoughts was not just to feel better, but to become better. The goal was Eudemonia, a life of flourishing achieved through wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control in every domain, from personal relationships to civic duty. Their cognitive techniques were always in service of this larger ethical project, a roadmap for the soul's journey toward excellence. Cognitive behavioral therapy, in stark contrast, is deliberately and effectively narrow in its scope. It is not a philosophy of life, it is a targeted, evidence-based psychological treatment. Its primary aim is clinical, to reduce specific, distressing symptoms and to improve daily functioning. Where Stoicism asks, "How shall I live a good life?" CBT asks, "How can I reduce the intensity of this anxiety so I can go to work?" Or what skills can I learn to break the cycle of these depressive thoughts? Its framework is pragmatic and problem-focused. It operationalizes, meaning it turns into a set of usable procedures, a psychological subset of the much larger Stoic project. Think of it this way. Stoicism is the entire university, with departments for metaphysics, civic duty, and personal character. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the highly effective and specialized wellness center on that campus, open to anyone who needs help with a particular challenge. One offers a comprehensive worldview, the other a focused toolkit for mental health. This distinction is crucial not to elevate one over the other, but to understand their different purposes. You can use CBT techniques to manage social anxiety without ever contemplating the nature of the cosmos or your role within it. The therapy works because it isolates and trains the cognitive machinery, the logic branch, without requiring you to buy into the full Stoic physics or ethics. Conversely, someone can deeply study Stoic philosophy and gain tremendous wisdom, yet still benefit from the structured, clinical support of CBT if they face a persistent pattern of distorted thinking that their philosophical practice alone cannot shift. The modern therapy extracted the potent psychological engine from the ancient philosophical vehicle and refined it for a specific clinical road. This is why the comparison is so illuminating, yet why it has boundaries. Stoicism provided the profound insight that our judgments shape our reality. Cognitive behavioral therapy took that insight, stripped it of its metaphysical and cosmic framing, tested it under clinical conditions, and built a replicable treatment manual around it. One is a map of the entire territory of human existence. The other is an expertly drawn guide to navigating the most treacherous swamps within that territory. You would not use a world atlas to find a trail through a specific forest, and you would not use a trail guide to understand continental drift. Each has its rightful and powerful place. This clarity allows us to appreciate the gift of each system on its own terms, and to see how together they offer a more complete picture of human resilience, from the grand philosophical question of how to live, down to the practical, moment-by-moment management of a worried mind. This philosophical blueprint is now being used to construct modern mental health programs. The clearest bridge from the ancient world to the therapy office is rational emotive behavior therapy, founded by Ellis. He did not just stumble upon ideas that resembled Stoicism, he deliberately built upon them. Ellis openly credited Stoic philosophers as a direct inspiration, stating that the core premise of his therapy came from a saying of Epictetus. He took the Stoic insight about judgments and gave it a clinical structure, creating the ABC model that is now taught worldwide. Where a Stoic might dispute an irrational desire, Ellis trained therapists to dispute a client's irrational musts, those absolute demands we place on ourselves, others, and the world. This was not an academic homage, it was a practical application, turning philosophical dialogue into a systematic therapeutic technique. The voice of Seneca, arguing logically with a friend's distress, found a direct descendant in the structured disputation of a modern therapy session. Another powerful modern model, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, demonstrates a profound conceptual alignment with Stoic practice, even if its path was more independent. ACT does not focus on challenging the content of thoughts as directly as traditional CBT. Instead, it emphasizes psychological flexibility, which involves accepting difficult thoughts and feelings while committing to value-driven action. This mirrors the Stoic sequence with remarkable clarity. The Stoic practice of distinguishing what is and is not within your control is the foundation of ACT's work on acceptance. The Stoic commitment to virtuous action, regardless of feeling, is the mirror image of ACT's committed action. When a person in ACT learns to make room for anxiety without letting it steer their life, they are practicing the cognitive distancing Marcus Aurelius achieved through his view from above. Both frameworks guide you to stop fighting the unwinnable war with your internal weather, so you can walk toward what you value. This convergence of ancient and modern is no longer confined to clinical settings. It has sparked a popular movement that brings the practices directly to people. Initiatives like Stoic Week, a global online event, invite thousands to live like a Stoic for 7 days. Participants are given a structured handbook that blends translated passages from Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus with contemporary psychological explanations and exercises. They might be asked to practice the evening review, reframing a daily frustration through a Stoic lens, or to use the dichotomy of control to manage work-related stress. These programs explicitly frame Stoicism not as a dusty historical subject, but as a form of cognitive behavioral training. They translate Premeditatio Malorum into a guided meditation on resilience and turn the focus on the present moment into a mindfulness exercise. This is the full circle moment, where the wisdom tradition is reintegrated with the scientific validation it inspired. It allows someone to read a line from Seneca about the futility of worrying over things outside our control, and then immediately use a thought record worksheet to apply that insight to their own specific worry about a future job interview. The ancient exercise and the modern tool are no longer separate. They are 2 pages in the same manual for a resilient mind. This integration offers a powerful synthesis, the deep, meaning-rich framework of philosophy, now supported by the tested, practical techniques of psychology. This hybrid approach is not a theoretical exercise, but a daily practice waiting to be built. You can begin your morning not with a scroll through notifications, but with a quiet moment of Stoic intention. Sit for just a few minutes and ask yourself a version of a question Marcus Aurelius might have posed. What qualities of character will I need today? Perhaps patience for a long meeting, or courage to have a difficult conversation. This is not about willing specific outcomes which are outside your control, but about setting your internal compass toward the values you wish to embody. This morning meditation aligns perfectly with the modern therapeutic focus on valued living, defining the personal principles that will guide your actions regardless of the emotional weather you encounter. You are programming your mind's response in advance, choosing the sailor you will be before the ship even leaves the harbor. As the day unfolds and inevitable stressors arise, your toolkit shifts to active engagement. When a sudden deadline lands or a critical email arrives, that initial surge of pressure is your cue to apply cognitive distancing. This is the modern, operational version of the Stoic view from above. Instead of fusing with the thought, "This is a disaster," you create a sliver of space, mentally step back and observe the narrative forming. You might simply note, "I am having the thought that this is a catastrophe," or ask, "Is this truly an emergency, or is it an important task?" This momentary pause prevents the emotional wave from crashing over you and lets you access the rational, problem-solving part of your mind. It is the difference between being in the storm and watching it from a sheltered porch. You acknowledge the wind and rain, but you are not defined by them. In that space, you can then apply the Stoic dichotomy of control with practical precision. Ask, what elements of this situation can I actually influence? Perhaps you can clarify the deadline, delegate a portion, or simply begin with the first logical step. What elements are truly outside your sway? The unrealistic expectations of others, or the fact that there are only so many hours in a day? By sorting the controllable from the uncontrollable, you channel your energy efficiently, moving from panic to purposeful action. Then, as the day closes, you move to integration with an evening review that blends ancient reflection with clinical structure. This is not a rehash of every annoyance, but a focused 5-minute audit modeled on the CBT thought record. Take one significant event where your emotions ran high, positive or negative. Briefly note the situation, then identify the core judgment or automatic thought that drove your reaction. Was it, "My contribution was overlooked, leading to frustration"? Or, "I handled that conflict well, leading to satisfaction"? Next, gently examine that thought. Was it entirely accurate, or was it filtered through a cognitive distortion like mind reading or personalization? Finally, craft a more balanced, evidence-based perspective. While my idea wasn't highlighted in the moment, 2 colleagues referenced it later, so it did land. My value isn't determined by a single meeting. This practice does not erase the feeling, but it processes it. It converts raw experience into learned wisdom, training your mind to default to more rational and compassionate interpretations over time. You are quite literally editing the story of your day before it becomes a fixed chapter in your mind's library. Together, these three practices form a resilient daily architecture. The morning sets your ethical direction, the day hones your real-time cognitive skills, and the evening consolidates the learning. This synthesis offers the best of both worlds, the profound, meaning-rich framework of Stoicism and the precise, actionable techniques of modern psychology. You are no longer just reading about these ideas, you are engineering your own mental environment, building habits of thought that anticipate challenge, navigate it with clarity, and learn from it with intention. The goal is not a life without storms, but to become so skilled a navigator that you can adjust your sails, trust your compass, and find a deeper strength in the journey itself. What would it feel like to end each day not exhausted by your reactions, but quietly empowered by your responses? This recurring discovery across 2,000 years is not a simple historical coincidence. It points toward something universal in the human condition. The profound alignment between Stoic philosophy and cognitive behavioral therapy suggests that both systems stumbled upon a fundamental lever in the human psyche, a basic mechanism of our mental and emotional functioning that is not bound by culture or era. They both identified the same source of our greatest resilience and our deepest suffering, our own capacity for interpretation. The lever is our ability to observe the stories we tell ourselves and with conscious effort to reshape them. This is not a cultural invention like a style of music or a culinary tradition. It appears to be a structural feature of how the human mind works, a psychological universal waiting to be recognized. Consider the physical parallels. Across continents and centuries, human beings discovered that a wedge splits wood, that a lever moves heavy objects, and that a wheel reduces friction. These are not cultural truths but physical ones, applications of fundamental principles of force and motion. The Stoic CBT model operates on a similar plane, but within the landscape of the mind. It reveals that the act of inserting a pause between an event and our reaction, of questioning the automatic narrative, functions like a psychological lever. It provides a mechanical advantage for moving the weight of our emotional world. This explains why the same solution emerged in the marble halls of Rome and the clinical offices of the 20th century. Different societies with vastly different technologies and beliefs kept encountering the same core problem, a mind tormented by its own unchecked judgments, and through observation and practice, they converged on the same core solution. A Roman senator using reason to disarm his anger before a political debate was applying the same principle as a modern student using a thought record to manage social anxiety before a presentation. The context is entirely different, but the underlying cognitive operation is identical. This universality is what makes these tools so enduringly powerful. They do not require you to adopt a specific religious view or cultural norm. They simply ask you to look inward at the process of your own thinking. The principle works whether you believe in the Stoic logos or in neuroscience because it is describing a function, not prescribing a belief. It is a map of a territory that exists within every human mind, the territory where perception meets emotion. When two separate explorers, using completely different instruments and languages, draw maps that match so perfectly, it strongly suggests the territory is real. This is why we find echoes of this cognitive model in wisdom traditions far beyond Greece and Rome. While not identical, many philosophical and contemplative practices across Asia, for instance, also emphasize the role of mindful observation in reducing attachment to distressing thoughts. The specific framing differs, but the core action, stepping back from the stream of thought to see it more clearly, is a recurring theme in humanity's search for peace. This cross-cultural resonance reinforces the idea that we are dealing with a fundamental aspect of human psychology. The suffering caused by a mind fused with its own negative stories is a universal experience. So too is the liberation found in creating a space of awareness around those stories. The Stoics called this space reason and judgment. Cognitive behavioral therapy calls it cognitive distancing and metacognition. Different words, same psychological space. This universality offers a profound and hopeful insight. It means that the path to greater resilience and well-being is not locked away in a secret doctrine or a privileged education. The lever is built into the design of your own mind. You already possess the fundamental equipment, the capacity for self-observation. The practices, whether ancient or modern, are simply the training manuals that teach you how to use that equipment with more skill. They help you recognize the lever and show you where to apply the pressure. When you learn to identify a catastrophic thought as just a thought, you are using that universal lever. When you choose a value-driven action despite a feeling of fear, you are applying that universal principle. The convergence of these two great systems across the millennia is a powerful signal. It tells us that amid all the chaos and change of human history, we have been slowly, collectively, mapping the stable foundations of our own inner world. We have been discovering again and again that while we cannot always choose what happens to us, we retain a profound and universal power to choose our relationship to what happens. That relationship, that space between event and reaction, is the birthplace of both our suffering and our freedom, and it is a territory that belongs to every one of us. This lineage transforms therapy from a clinical procedure into a human tradition. For anyone stepping into a therapist's office or hesitating at the idea of it, this history offers a powerful reframe. The techniques you might learn there, the thought records, the cognitive restructuring, are not arbitrary exercises invented in a lab. They are the latest, most refined iteration of a conversation about human resilience that began in ancient courtyards and continues in quiet consulting rooms today. Understanding this can dissolve the clinical coldness some fear. You are not being given a mechanical fix for a broken part. You are being handed a set of tools that philosophers, leaders, and ordinary people have used for millennia to cultivate a sturdier, more graceful inner life. This is not about pathology, but about practice. It is skill building in the art of living. That shift in perspective can dramatically increase your buy-in to the therapeutic process. When a therapist suggests you track your automatic thoughts, it can feel strange, even trivial. But when you see it as the modern equivalent of Marcus Aurelius' evening meditations, the exercise gains a different weight. You are not just filling out a worksheet, you are participating in a long-standing discipline of self-examination. You are doing what Seneca did in his letters, what Epictetus did with his students, systematically investigating the stories that cause you pain. This philosophical understanding frames the work as something far deeper than symptom management. Yes, the goal is to feel less anxious, less burdened by low mood. But the mechanism for getting there is the cultivation of wisdom. You are learning to see more clearly, to judge more accurately, and to act more in alignment with who you truly wish to be. This approach moves therapy from a model of fixing what is wrong to one of building what is strong. Traditional medical models can sometimes leave a client feeling like a patient with an illness to be cured. The Stoic CBT lineage suggests a different identity, that of an apprentice or an athlete. You are an apprentice in the art of using your own mind, learning from masters both ancient and modern. You are a mental athlete training your cognitive muscles of discernment, perspective, and acceptance. The homework is not a prescription, it is a training regimen. Each time you catch a catastrophic thought and reframe it, you are not just solving a single problem, you are strengthening a neural pathway for resilience that will be there for the next challenge. This is empowering. It places you in the active role of builder, not the passive role of repair job. Ultimately, this historical bridge reveals that therapy, at its best, is not about helping you cope with an abnormal life. It is about equipping you to navigate a normal human life with more skill and less unnecessary suffering. The anxieties, the griefs, the frustrations you bring into the room are not signs of a unique malfunction. They are the very stuff of the human condition, the same raw material the Stoics sought to shape with their philosophy. Your therapist is not a mechanic for a strange machine, but a guide in a very old, very human terrain. They are helping you learn a language of the mind that has been spoken for thousands of years, a language that turns confusion into clarity and reaction into choice. When you understand that you are walking a path worn by generations of seekers, the journey feels less lonely and the tools feel more trustworthy. You are not just reducing symptoms, you are reclaiming a birthright, the capacity to meet your life with eyes wide open and a steady heart. For the student of philosophy, this connection is more than a fascinating footnote. It is a powerful validation. When you study Stoicism, you are not merely analyzing the intellectual history of the Roman Empire. You are examining a system of thought that has been empirically stress-tested across 2 millennia and found to be structurally sound. This transforms those ancient texts from abstract ideals locked in the past into a living, breathing manual for the mind. The gap between the ivory tower and the therapist's office suddenly vanishes. You realize that Epictetus was not just building elegant arguments, he was providing cognitive tools that directly alter human well-being, tools that modern science has since confirmed. This changes how you read. When you encounter Marcus Aurelius writing, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. You are no longer just appreciating a poetic turn of phrase from a dead emperor. You are reading a clinical prescription for resilience, a principle that underpins modern therapeutic approaches to post-traumatic growth. The text stops being a relic and starts being a protocol. This historical thread answers a quiet doubt that many philosophy students harbor. Is any of this actually practical? Does reading these old books truly change how you live, or is it just an academic exercise? The story of Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy provides a resounding yes. It demonstrates that the most enduring philosophical ideas are not just logically consistent, they are psychologically effective. They work in the messy, unpredictable laboratory of human life. This means your philosophical study is not separate from the quest for a better life, it is central to it. You are learning the original code for mental software that therapists now help people install. This perspective bridges a frustrating divide. Philosophy can sometimes feel disconnected, a realm of pure ideas floating above the daily struggles of anxiety, heartbreak, and stress. Therapy can sometimes feel overly technical, a set of symptom-focused techniques without a deeper framework for meaning. The Stoic CBT synthesis shows they are two sides of the same coin. The philosophy provides the why, the deep framework of virtue, nature, and human purpose. The therapy provides the how, the specific, repeatable steps to train your mind within that framework. As a student, you gain the unique ability to see both the grand architecture and the practical wiring. You understand that Seneca's letters on anger are not just moral essays, they are detailed cognitive restructuring sessions. You see that the Stoic division of control is not a metaphysical claim, but a functional psychological strategy for reducing anxiety. This enriches your study immeasurably. Every text becomes a potential tool. Every argument becomes a testable hypothesis about human nature. Your engagement shifts from passive consumption to active experimentation. You are not just learning what the Stoics believed, you are testing whether their methods hold true in your own experience. Does practicing the evening review alter your mood? Does applying the dichotomy of control reduce your daily stress? This turns philosophy from a subject you think about into a practice you live by. The history proves that the most profound insights about how to live are not confined to any one era. They are discoveries about the operating system of the human mind, waiting to be rediscovered by each new generation. Your study connects you to that unbroken chain of seekers, from the porch of Epictetus to the modern counseling chair, all asking the same essential question and arriving at the same profound answer. The mind's greatest freedom lies in mastering its own narratives. The most obvious critique is that we are simply dressing up modern therapy in an ancient costume. Is Stoicism just cognitive behavioral therapy in a toga, a quaint historical footnote with no real substance of its own? This is a fair question, and it deserves a thoughtful answer. The short reply is no, not at all, but the long answer is where the real magic lies. To reduce Stoicism to mere prototherapy is to miss its vast horizon. Stoicism was and is a complete philosophy of life. It offered answers to the biggest questions we can ask. What is the nature of the universe? What is our place within it? What does it mean to live a good life? Its psychological techniques were never the end goal. They were the training ground for the soul, the daily exercises to build the character required to live in accordance with nature and virtue. Cognitive behavioral therapy, by brilliant and necessary design, asks none of those cosmic questions. Its framework is proudly pragmatic, focused on relieving specific distress and improving daily function. It is a precision tool, not a worldview. So if we stop at the surface, the comparison seems to flatten the ancient into the mold of the modern, but look deeper and the opposite happens. The comparison does not diminish Stoicism. It validates its most profound psychological insights with the authority of modern science. For centuries, Stoic advice could be dismissed as just that, well-meaning advice, the kind of thing a wise elder might say. Now we have something extraordinary. We have clinical trials, brain imaging, and decades of outcome studies that demonstrate measurably that the core cognitive mechanism the Stoics identified, the link between judgment and emotion, is not just philosophical speculation. It is a fact of human neuropsychology. This empirical backing elevates Stoic psychology from interesting idea to confirmed principle. It tells us that when Marcus Aurelius wrote his private notes on managing anger, he was not just being poetic. He was engaging in a form of personal cognitive therapy that we now know can rewire neural pathways. Suddenly, those ancient texts gleam with a new kind of relevance. They are not obsolete, they are prescient. They contain a map of the mind that we have only recently learned to read with scientific instruments. Conversely, this lineage enriches modern therapy by rooting it in a deep humanistic tradition. It connects the therapist's notepad to the philosopher's scroll. For someone engaging in CBT, understanding this history can transform the experience. You are not just learning a clinical technique, you are participating in a long-standing human conversation about resilience and wisdom. The thought record on your table is a direct descendant of the Stoic Evening Review. This connection adds a layer of meaning and continuity that pure clinical instruction often lacks. It frames the work not as fixing a broken mind, but as cultivating a wise one. It turns skill building into a kind of philosophical practice. So, no, Stoicism is not CBT in a toga. It is something far more significant. It is the original, comprehensive blueprint from which modern psychology extracted one of its most effective engines. Recognizing this does not confuse the two, it clarifies the gift of each. Stoicism offers the grand narrative, the why. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers the clinical manual, the how. Together, they provide a complete picture from the stars above to the quiet work within our own minds. One gives us a universe to understand our place in, the other gives us the tools to live well within it. This is not a reduction, but a revelation. It shows that the quest for a peaceful mind is not a modern invention, but a timeless human endeavor, and that the most effective paths were discovered not through technology, but through the courageous, inward gaze of philosophers who dared to question how their own minds worked. This dialogue between ancient thought and modern science is far from a closed chapter. We are witnessing the early stages of a new synthesis, where the philosophical framework and the clinical evidence are beginning to inform and refine one another in real time. Researchers are now actively designing and testing what are called Stoic-based interventions. These are structured programs that explicitly use Stoic texts and exercises as the core curriculum for improving psychological well-being. Early studies are exploring their impact on everything from workplace resilience to managing long-term health challenges. The goal is to move beyond anecdote and measure, with scientific rigor, how practicing Stoic principles like the dichotomy of control or the evening review affects stress hormones, neural activity, and overall life satisfaction. This research could unlock a more nuanced therapeutic toolbox. Imagine a future therapy protocol that doesn't just teach cognitive distancing in a generic way, but offers a patient-specific philosophical reflections from Marcus Aurelius or Seneca that resonate with their particular struggle, providing a rich, meaning-filled context for the technical skill they are learning. The Stoic emphasis on virtue and purpose could help address a common critique of some modern therapy, that it focuses so much on reducing symptoms that it sometimes neglects the bigger question of what to build once the suffering lessens. A combined approach might help individuals not just feel less anxious, but also cultivate a deeper sense of character and direction, answering the what for that gives the coping skills their ultimate value. This convergence is also spilling out of the clinic and into the cultural mainstream as a growing movement often called Stoic mindfulness. It's a hybrid practice that takes the present moment awareness of mindfulness meditation and intentionally pairs it with the value-driven, action-oriented framework of Stoicism. It's not just about observing your breath to calm down, but about using that calm, clear space to ask Stoic questions. In this moment of quiet, what is within my control? What would a wise and courageous response look like here? This practice moves beyond passive observation to engage discernment. You might sit in mindfulness and notice a feeling of resentment arising. A pure mindfulness approach might encourage you to simply note the feeling and let it pass. A Stoic-informed mindfulness would take the next step. It would ask you to gently examine the judgment behind the resentment, perhaps the story that someone has wronged you unfairly, and to apply the logical, compassionate perspective shift that Stoicism trains. This creates a powerful loop. Mindfulness creates the space for Stoic reasoning, and Stoic reasoning gives purposeful direction to the calm that mindfulness cultivates. We are standing at the beginning of a fascinating new dialogue. For centuries, philosophy and science often spoke different languages, one of meaning and the other of mechanism. What we see now is the potential for a shared vocabulary, where the profound human questions posed by the ancients are explored with the precise tools of modern cognitive science. This isn't about proving the Stoics were right in every metaphysical detail. It's about recognizing that they were astonishingly accurate cartographers of the mind's emotional landscape. Their map has been validated, and now we have the technology to explore that territory in ever greater detail. This partnership could lead to more personalized and culturally adaptable forms of mental training, techniques that honor the universal cognitive principles while being framed in the wisdom traditions that resonate most deeply with different individuals. The future of this synthesis isn't a single therapy or a rigid doctrine. It's an ongoing, collaborative exploration of how to live with both wisdom and wellness, how to build minds that are not only healthy but also deep, resilient, and aligned with something greater than momentary comfort. The quiet work in a therapist's office and the reflective reading of a 2,000-year-old text are becoming part of the same continuous project, the timeless human endeavor to understand ourselves and, in that understanding, to find our freedom. The journey we have traced reveals more than a vague resemblance. Stoicism did not merely hint at modern psychology. it drafted a detailed, operational blueprint for the mind's own renovation. It provided step-by-step instructions for cognitive restructuring, from catching distorted judgments to disputing them with reason. It outlined behavioral protocols, from the evening review to committed action in line with virtue. This was not a loose collection of wise sayings, but a systematic training manual for mental resilience, a pre-scientific therapy waiting for the tools of clinical validation. The 2,000-year gap between the philosopher's porch and the therapist's office is not a mark of irrelevance, but a testament to the enduring human quest. It shows that across empires and epochs, we have been circling the same fundamental truth, reaching for rationality and peace of mind through the disciplined management of our own thoughts. This recurring discovery suggests that the need to navigate our inner world with skill is a permanent feature of the human condition. The convergence of these two traditions offers us a powerful invitation, a chance to integrate timeless wisdom with modern science. We do not have to choose between the profound, meaning rich framework of ancient philosophy and the precise, evidence-based tools of contemporary therapy. They are complementary, each filling the gaps of the other. You can read Marcus Aurelius for his cosmic perspective on adversity, and use a thought record to manage the specific anxiety of a Monday morning. You can contemplate Epictetus on control while practicing the mindfulness techniques that help you stay present. This integration empowers you to build a life that is not just symptom-free, but deeply purposeful. So let this be your call to exploration. Pick up a modern translation of the Stoics and read them not as historical artifacts, but as cognitive training guides. Explore the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, whether through a book, an app, or a conversation with a professional. See them not as separate paths, but as two guides pointing toward the same summit, one holding a map drawn from lived wisdom, the other holding a compass calibrated by science. Your own mind is the territory they both describe. Start the exploration there, in the quiet space between an event and your reaction, and discover the enduring power that has waited within you and within human understanding for over 2,000 years.